guy is? Ed White. Excellent. Thank you very much. Ed White, the first American astronaut to walk in space. And I'm showing you this because I want to illustrate this point of uncertainty again and the importance of disruption. When they first put a man in a spacesuit in outer space, they really had no idea what would happen. The Russians were the first to do this, by the way, not the Americans. And the Russian cosmonaut actually had a very serious problem with the spacesuit, which is that when he left the capsule, the damn thing, being pressurized as it was, got so big that he couldn't get back in the capsule. He wouldn't fit back in the door. And you're saying, well, that's pretty silly. Couldn't they have figured this out? The answer is no. They didn't know what the rules were. When Ed White took his infamous spacewalk, which he was gleeful about, I mean, they had a tough time getting him back in the spacecraft. He was enjoying himself so much. When he got back in, he had lost about 6 or 7 pounds of weight and perspiration. And when NASA found out about this, their response was, well, you were very excited. You know, when you're excited, you sweat. And Ed White said, I don't think so. You know, I'm not an excitable kind of guy, but it was awfully hot in that spacesuit. They went through almost 6 astronauts until they finally figured out that you couldn't air-cool a spacesuit. You had to water-cool it. Liquid-cooled worked. Air-cooled didn't. No one knew what the rules were. And in many ways, what you're doing, what we're doing collectively, is building for an environment where we just don't know what the rules are. So how do you do that? I'll give you one of the most important lessons that you can teach any organization or any individual. And I talk about this in the innovation zone. It's a very simple concept which most large companies despise. It's called fail fast. But you're gonna fail. Embrace and accept failure as part of your process of innovation. Just do it quickly and get it over with. Do it quickly and get it over with. And it's amazing how risk-averse large companies are. I remember a CEO of a very large company that I knew well, and there are some folks in the audience here who probably will know who I'm talking about because they were also there, and the CEO saying, you know, guys, in this company, our upside is limited, our downside is unlimited. Right? That's the kind of attitude that despises failure, because the risk is infinite. The gains are marginal. It's tough to innovate in that kind of an environment, which is why behavior limits your capacity to innovate. But we're all building for this unknown. We're all building for, you know, a place, a time where the rules are not yet defined for us. Fail, but fail fast, and embrace that failure. The best lesson that I've ever seen in all of this, do you recognize this thing, this little device? First transistor radio. Absolutely. Who popularized the pocketable transistor radio? Who was it? Sony, you betcha. They had the model down, too. I mean, Sony was, Akio Morita was one of the, I think, seminal innovators of the last 100 years. Over 6 billion. I mean, this thing still, you know, beats the pants off of the iPod, right? 6 billion of these devices sold. They called it pocketable, by the way, because Akio had to create tailor-made shirts for his salespeople that had double-width pockets, because it really wasn't a pocket transistor radio. But the marketing team at Sony said, let's call it pocketable, and we'll get away with that. The device that most of you remember Sony for, however, is not the pocket transistor radio, but it's another device that I grew up with, which is the Walkman. Talk about innovation. You know, Sony went to its competitors and said, we think this would be a good idea, and its competitors said, you're nuts. Small headphones? Come on. No one wants small headphones. You know, I remember my headphones when I was a kid. You needed a neck brace to put these things on, right? Big was better and heavy, and there was only a 6-foot cord because you weren't going to leave the living room with headphones on. It didn't make sense. Certainly not to go out and play in traffic and, you know, walk around and be with other people with headphones on. I mean, the behaviors didn't make sense. Sony said, well, that's okay. Let's try it in the marketplace. And ultimately, they created a model, a consumer model, that, you know, to this day really defines high tech, from the consumer standpoint anyway. They bought the record labels, they bought the talent, they owned the music industry. They owned it. And what happened? This happened. Along comes Apple. When did they introduce the iPod? What year was it? 2001. Not a good time, right? From an economic standpoint, not a good time. Innovators double down when the economy goes downhill. They double down. Apple's a great example of that. I mean, some of the companies in here as well are great examples of that. You double down when the industry plummets. So they come to market with a device that was going to revolutionize the music industry. This would be the equivalent of buying a high-performance luxury car from Maytag. Right? They had no business in the music industry. Sony owned it. Sony owned it. Sony had become so complex that they were producing CDs that had digital rights management that would not allow the CD to play on a Sony disc player. That's how complex they had gotten. And along comes Apple and says, you know what, we're going to simplify this entire marketplace. And we're going to change not the technology, because Apple didn't invent any of this. They acquired all of it, some of it even from Sony. We're going to simplify the marketplace, and we're going to change not the technology, but we're going to change the behavior. And that, in fact, is what's happened. I mean, real innovation, you measure it by the impact it has on behavior, not by the impact it has on technology. And then along comes Flip, does the same thing. Gets acquired by Cisco for what, almost, was it $500 million or thereabouts, Carlos? Along comes Flip. And, you know, remember now, this is at a point when the video cam manufacturers are all creating complexity on top of complexity on top of complexity. I mean, the more buttons, bells and whistles and menus your camcorder had, the better it was, right? The greater the value. And along comes Flip and says, you know what, we're not even going to give you a zoom. We're just going to give you a little dongle to plug it into your USB. Changed not the technology, changed the behavior. I'm not saying there's not inventive stuff in all of this. There is. But the real innovation is in how these things change the way that we behave, not the way that they change the technology. So, we're growing up in this incredible age of uncertainty. We're surrounded by it. And the question ends up being, what generation do you fall in? How does this uncertainty affect you? And it affects all of us in different ways, but there are a few ways I'm going to share with you that I think we can sort of quiz ourselves to see which of these generations we fall into. And it's not based on age. I refuse to believe that this generational issue is based just on age. It's based on how we behave. So what are you? Well, let me give you a few questions, and you tell me what you are. So we did a survey at Delphi not quite a year ago, where we asked, one of the questions we asked was this question here. My daughter, I'll tell you how much I believe in the stuff I'm talking about. My 15-year-old daughter will proof all of the survey work that we do. I'll have her take the surveys, the Delphi surveys, because I want her point of view. I want the point of view of someone who doesn't have to ask what generation am I in. So she read this question, and she said, Dad, that's ridiculous. I would never call you. I would text you. Of course. Of course. I'm stuck. I'm stuck. I mean, it's painful for me to get unstuck, but you've got to do it. The only way you do it is by seeing the world through their eyes. I'll put a few more of these up here with you. I mean, this stuff is laughable. It's interesting because, you know, we're all going through it. And we're all feeling the pressure, the social pressure. How many Facebook friends do you have? How many Facebook friends do I have? You know, when's the last time you had a panic attack? It was probably related to leaving your cell phone at home. I mean, these are things that we're all experiencing. Do you feel this way? Do you get really competitive with your friends about the number of followers you have on Twitter or the number of Facebook friends that you have? I mean, you know, these are things that are surprising all of us. You know, we're being blindsided by this. Got a question for you. When you get up in the morning, is email one of the first or second things you do the minute you get out of bed? Raise your hand. Email, first or second thing. Isn't that wild? For how many of you is it the first thing you do before anything else? Okay. How many of you keep your iPod or your BlackBerry under your pillow? Hands are going up. Hands are going up, right? I mean, this is the world that we're living in. You know, you talk about all this in the abstract, and it sounds interesting, but we're living through this. And these are not issues that I think are going to go away. This is just a glimpse of some of them. And of course, we have this whole new vocabulary, thanks to instant messaging, that we now have to relearn the English language through. We are at a point, from a technology standpoint, I think, where the machines we've built are accelerating so fast that we just don't know how to keep up with them in terms of our behaviors. We don't know. And here's the dividing line. If you call it technology, you're on the wrong side of that line. Technology is what you didn't grow up with. Think about that. Technology is what you didn't grow up with. My son Adam, who's 11, doesn't call it technology. It's just what he does. So at 9 years old, when I was in my office and he was in the playroom and he was doing Club Penguin, an online social networking game with his friends, and all of a sudden I heard, "Hey Jack," his friend he was playing with, "Hey Jack, you're on the wrong server." I thought, whoa, Adam knows what a server is. How cool is that? So I went over and I said, "Adam, what's a server?" He said, "It's just a place you go to." "What, you mean like the shopping mall?" "Yeah, kind of like that. It's kind of like a town. You know, you go to a town, you go to the server." He doesn't know what a server is. It's not technology. It's just what he does. It's just what he does. If you call it technology, you're on the wrong side of the line. Technology is what you haven't grown up with. So what's this image? Again, from my favorite publication. This is what G-suits looked like when planes started to go faster than human endurance could sustain. So around the Second World War, you know, planes started to do stuff that, you know, could pull 9, 10 or more Gs. Human beings can't do that. You know, 9 Gs is about the limit for the superhuman among us. And they realized that if you wanted a career as a pilot, you had better either keep it under 9 Gs or you'd better figure out a way to change the human physiology. Tough to do. So this is one of the early pressure suits they created to help do that. Why do I point this out? Because today when I think of technologists, when I look at IT individuals, I see them in these suits. They can't focus on the mission objective. They can't focus on getting the job done because they're trying just to keep the damn lights on. The technology is so complex that they can't do what they're really good at. They can't express their core competency, the stuff we were talking about earlier, because they're too busy making the mechanics of the thing work. And we're right at the cusp of that. We're at the cusp where we're going to build, hopefully, and I do believe this, we're going to build the technologies that allow us to focus on what we're really good at, which is not playing with technology, right? It's doing what we do well as individuals.